if it's required for a company to build an AI agent automation application, they need to deploy X amount of engineers, designer, product person, and take 6 months to build it. That screws up the economics. If you make it easy, and that's the main thing about CrewAI, and anyone in the community is going to tell you that, CrewAI is the easiest, the simplest, the fastest. And when you do that, what we are seeing is that you also screw the economics, but in the other way, where now it's so easy that companies can basically try things. They can try and throw different things at the wall. When then something sticks, they double down on that. And because this is such a new tech, this is the way to go. Like, you gotta be able to experiment and gotta be fast. You can have to deploy like 3, 5, 10 engineers into a project for like 3 months or 6 months to get something working. You gotta be able to like enable your entire company to try new things.
Welcome to Software Snack Bites. I'm your host, Show McGosh of boldstart Ventures, and today I'm excited to be joined by my colleague, Eliot Durbin, and one of our founders, Joao Moura, CEO of CrewAI.
Hey there.
Joao was previously the Director of AI Engineering at Clearbit, which was acquired by Hubspot. And in this episode, we're going to cover agentic workflows, current agent use cases that are actually being used and deployed by enterprises today, and what trends in AI to focus on. So really, what I want listeners to take away from this is when we talk about agentic workflows and AI agents, it's not just like this futuristic thing. Like, people are using CrewAI and other platforms to be able to, build real use cases today. So with that, let's just dive into Joao's background. Before we kind of start, I think you have some news to announce. So, why don't you first start with like what CrewAI does and then dive into that news?
I love that. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, so I'm very excited about it. Why don't I start breaking some of the news? There's a lot going on this week, but all good things. Just like a little too much sometimes, but in a good way. So if you haven't seen, basically we have a few things. One, official partnership with IBM. Honestly, IBM, amazing company. They're doing so much on AI, and Watson has been like one of the OG AI platforms. So it's great to see now they're embracing kind of agents as well, and partnering with them has been great. I think we're going to do a lot of interesting things together. Also, a new partnership with Celonis, one of the biggest automation platforms in Europe. We're very excited about this. Celonis is known for like process automations. And I think there's like a agentic, like just marries with that, right? There's like something about it that just goes right. And on top of that, there's a new CrewAI course coming in this Wednesday. Yes, I know, it's insane.
That's a trifecta.
Yeah, I have been working with Andrew Yang on this, and honestly, Andrew is amazing. His team on deep learning is incredible. And the cool thing about this course is it has a different spin on it. And that's all about this podcast as well. It's about advanced and production use cases. So our class has a use case that we built together that is meant to be like helping companies out there. And we actually have one interview that is like 20 minutes long with the commercial Gen AI CTO from PwC, where we basically talk how PwC is using CrewAI in production. So honestly, it's pretty good. So there's a lot going on, including the platform launch. So now that people can access, but it's an exciting week.
And I think we, even within that, we didn't even talk about some of the funding news that I think you're going to announce too, right? Is by the time this comes out, it may have either be the day of or a day after, but what is going on the funding front?
Exactly. Honestly, there's no way that we could have pulled any of that. It was not for boldstart and other of our investors that have been helping us. So it has been amazing. We are announcing that we have raised a little over $18 million in funding. And boldstart was kind of like our inception lead and helped us through that initial phase of like grinding and figuring out. And that was so helpful. It's great to have Eliot here in the call. And now we have Insights leading our Series A and a few other partners, including Blitzscaling, Craft, Earl Grey, and a few others. And it has been an exciting journey, honestly. And both the institutional investors and also the angel investors, Andrew himself and Dharmesh, among others, have been super helpful.
So before we kind of start to dive into the agents and kind of what they do, and Elliot kind of will lead that section, but I just want to start with maybe first of all, why don't you describe what CrewAI does, and then also kind of how did the idea even come about? Like you're the director of AI engineering at this company. Like what's going on, right? What's going through your mind?
Showmake, this is a good question. So I keep telling the story, and my wife hates me for it because I keep putting like her in the spotlight. But actually, it was kind of like she was the one that prompted me to that. So I was doing like regular business, director of AI engineering at Clearbit, basically leading their like enterprise platform in all the AI like developments. And this was early LLMs. Like this is a while ago, like a couple years, maybe even more. And we're doing like very advanced stuff for that, like for that period of time. Like we're doing RAG at the scale that now people are doing it, but back then was like no one's land. And then my wife basically came to me and said like, hey, you're doing all this fancy AI stuff. You should be posting about it online. But I suck at LinkedIn. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I could put together an agent to help me with that. And that ended up working like a charm. It worked so great. And I just wanted to build more agents. So it's almost like organically, I looked at what was online, like all the tools, and there was some tools around back then, but none of them really kind of like struck me as the right thing. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to build my own. And that's how the open source started. And then from there, again, organically turned into a company. And now it's very exciting to have such a big team working.
Well, that's incredible. Well, Elliot, I think we want to sort of dive into the meat of the stuff. So I'll let you kind of kick it off.
Well, Shomik, thanks for having me here. Can I just connect it to what you just said, which is I watched you at the very beginning, and when we met, it was very clear that you were plugged into a wall outlet of electricity, and you were just so lit up about what agents can do. Can we just talk about what pulled you into starting a company? Because this wasn't a company in the beginning. It was something that you built for yourself, and it was a solution. And then, I think it would be great for everybody to hear that, because that's a big part of why we're all here.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And honestly, I think there's a few different moving pieces that goes into that. And it was kind of like starting, like making this into a company was not something that like day to night, like, all right, now I'm doing this. It was kind of like I had to internalize the process a little bit and kind of convince myself to go into that. So there was a period that was like, should I not? And I have zero regrets. It has been such an amazing experience, a lot of work, but hey, it's what I signed up for and I don't regret it. But I think early days, I think there was no other option. The project was taking up so much. So many people are using. I would go to those meetups and I would meet random people that would say, hey, I work at Oracle and we have a team that is using CrewAI. And then other companies would reach out to me and say like, hey, we want to use CrewAI. Like, how can you help us? And I was like, well, there's no way that I can even support this as open source if I don't have resources or people. Nonetheless, build something to help these companies to build this, because they have very specific needs that the open source community don't necessarily care about. But I need some platform to serve them. So I had no other choice other than make this into a company in order to fulfill that vision. And yeah, zero regrets. Has been an amazing experience.
Amazing answer. Just you were compelled because you saw what it could do. It needed more resources. So building more folks to contribute to it was a natural move forward. So for the listeners that don't know, what is an AI agent? How would you explain it to my 10-year-old nephew?
I love that. That's a good one. I think that,
or me as a 10-year-old, I don't know.
I would say the thing is like, the thing about agents is agency. I think honestly it's that simple. You see like so many people kind of like trying to give different definitions or different examples. You can see people doing regular graph and node-based automations and calling that agents. I think the beauty of agents is that they have autonomy. So autonomously decide how to go about something in order to achieve a goal. I would say that's simply it. In the middle of it, you have an LLM that is serving as kind of like an engine or a brain. And then there's a bunch of orchestration going on around that to give this agent autonomy to decide on how to use that brain, how to use the tools available to it to make sure that it can get to a reasonable conclusion. But I would say that agency is the main thing that you see in agents. If there's no agency, probably not an agent.
That's very straightforward to remember too. You're very quotable. Agency in agents. So if you think about the way that you started it for blogging, right? Tell us a little bit more about the use cases that have popped up relative to suggesting that large enterprises could use it. Because agency and autonomy are not two things that I associate with what enterprises really want in their infrastructure.
I gotta say, it's impressive. If you think about what make these agents kind of like exciting for these enterprises is that they have a very specific set of abilities, right? So, of course, the ability to create. The LLMs are great. If you ask them to write something, they do. If you ask them to come up with an idea, they'll try to put something together. But then on top of that, there is an ability to react and react in real time. So if you think about and you can experience this firsthand with ChatGPT yourself, like you can throw a recipe in there or a PhD thesis and the thing's going to work out. So the ability to react to real-time data, it's something that kind of speaks up to enterprise because it gets them thinking like, all right, well, it means that if a customer does something that is unexpected or if my process automations changes, these agents can pick that up and they can react to that. That's interesting. And that leads to kind of like a third ability. And that's kind of like this self-heal capability that agents come. And if you compare this with more traditional automation, what you have is it's a very brittle kind of automation. Like if the process changes, things breaks. If the bottom changes, things breaks. If the person that operated is not there anymore, things breaks. But with the agents, you have kind of like this. If they try and they meet kind of like a dead end, they can reflect and get back and try something different. So I think what started with very simple use cases very quickly branched out into cases for sales, marketing, internal automations, research, coding. There are companies out there. There's a lot that I can't share because NDAs, but there are companies out there that during their estimates are saving hundreds of thousands of dollars by having some of these agents running production environments for automations like that.
So it's interesting because I think you're describing a lot of how the agent is thinking, is reasoning, is doing all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I guess the question is for people listening, and feel free to get as technical as you'd like, but is it every single time that it has to think something, it's calling to the LLM, and then it's kind of working through that and then acting upon it, then doing another LLM call? Is that how it's going? Is there some sort of memory that's calling on that, hey, I did this task, last not even last hour, and now I can do it again, right? Just kind of walk us through a little bit of how that reasoning actually works.
Yeah, when you think about agents, if you don't go too deep, just go one level lower, what you have is an LLM in the center. You have a task that is being given to it. You have a set of tools, and then you have this agent kind of using those tools. So it looks fairly simple. The problem is once that you go into production, then all the questions start to pop up. It's all right, what happens if my agents use the same tool twice? Well, what if that tool is calling an API and I don't want to blow up that API response limit or rate limit? Well, what if I want these agents to remember the last time they did it because I don't want them researching the same thing again? Or when they improve it. So you start to add all these other layers of layers of communication, layers of caching, layers of memory. And then even within memory, you have a long-term memory, a short-term memory, a contextual memory. So all these extra layers start to pop up. And that's the difference between hey, I want to do this quick hack, or I want something that can actually sustain production use cases. So there's a clear distinction there. But a good thing that you pointed out is the LLM is behind it. It's guiding a lot of this thought process and how to use these tools. You have a lot of regular code surrounding it, especially on CrewAI. There's a bunch of guardrails that are kind of making sure that you're utilizing LLM to its full potential. But if you think about these LLMs, without getting too technical, but if you think about LLMs, they're regular ML models, right? And for the folks there that have played with regular classifications and prediction models in the past, the same rules still apply. You're basically trying to do a prediction based on features. That's kind of what they technically are called. So if you're talking about predicting if it's going to rain or not. You have a few features like what is the season of year? What is the time of the day? What is the current temperature? So given those features, you try to predict an outcome. And LLMs are the same. The difference is that the features now are not time of the day, season, and yada, yada, yada. They're like the text that you have written so far, and the prediction are the next tokens. So once that clicks for you, you understand that a lot of like what the next word will be depending very heavily on what the words were up to this point. So there is like, that's why prompting becomes like such a big thing, and like you can get widely different results, and why like having an orchestration layers that knows how to pull these things and know these details and was thought out from the ground up to that kind of can give you amazing results. But yeah, I'll stop there to not get too technical.
Well, no, I mean, there's this is a technical audience, so they will love this. Nice. But I have another question to ask before I hand it over to Eliot. But like, what in terms of how that that prompting actually works, like the way I imagine it, or at least the way I tell my wife is, you need to prompt it. For example, we have a baby. We say like, you are an expert pediatrician. And basically what I'm trying to say from that prompt is like, hey, call from this, in my mind, like this database that you have that is pediatrician database somewhere in this, massive neural net, right? Is that kind of like what's actually happening behind the scenes? Is like by doing that prompt, you're channeling it to a certain vector of information or something, and then it's calling from that vector database, or like kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, it's kind of that, not necessarily that. That would be like, for example, if you're doing reg, that would be more like in line with what you're saying, where like you're basically the meaning of the words that you're using are going to put you close to a bunch of other words that have similar meaning and occupy a similar space. So that would be like more like a clear description of reg, but it's not too different from what it's happening with LLMs. Remember, if we oversimplify this neural network, what you're thinking like is basically regular like prediction models. So the same way that if you say, well, it's 30 degrees and it's 4 p.m., but you say, oh, it's the summer or it's the winter, the likelihood of having a rain is widely different. That's the same thing. The words that you're using are going to heavily impact what are going to be the next few words that you're going to get from the model. So you're right. Like, and if people want to try this out, I would say the way to do it is ask ChatGPT to give you like an assessment on a stock, and then open a news chat and ask for the same thing, but it starts with, you are a FINHA approved investor. And you're going to see how widely different response you're going to get.
So crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little insane. And I got to say one thing, like, I don't want to get too much into that, but this is kind of like of the things that we were doing at Clearbit early on that kind of got me so spun up with AI. It was like, I had some background in like in AI prior to this. So I was doing classifications and regression models before this, but I think like the interesting thing was, there's technologies that have been around for so long, like RAG, like embedding is like an old tech. But now, because all this new set of engineers are playing with this, you start to see all these crazy ideas pop up. So yeah, it's very interesting to see how people are using these things out in the wild.
Well, it's amazing how fast it's all developing too, right? And I think if I think back to when we met, it was, I mean, you were aiming to get to 1 million crews, somewhere around there. How many crews are running today? Like 10 months, 11 months later?
It's insane. Honestly, I would need to pull the most up-to-date numbers, but we broke a new record recently where we had 1 million agents being executed in a single day. And that was just like what is happening?
Yeah, when your sum total turns into the daily, it's a good sign that you're growing.
And I mean, the thing that we're talking about before, right? I think this is what people don't get is how real this is today. This is not like, it's like for your company might be maybe talking about 1 year down the road, 5 years down the road or whatever, but I can guarantee you many companies are doing this right now. Like there are companies running this in production. They're like in big ones that you wouldn't believe, like PwC that we have the interview with. So yeah, it's very interesting to see some of that.
Can we talk about kind of what you're learning as you kind of interact with these big enterprises? Because I remember when developers really got empowered, call it 10 years ago, 15 years ago inside of the enterprise with things like GitHub, and then and tooling to make them faster, more secure, like Sneak. How do you think about your audience inside of these enterprises? Are they technical folks? Are they stakeholders? Is it both? But like, how do you organize it in your head as you're learning more and more about those buyers?
Yes. So from a business point of view, I think open source is near and dear to me. A lot of my career came from open source. I had another 2 or 3 very successful open source projects through my career that led me to a lot of conference speaking opening up to job opportunities. So I'm very grateful for that. And it's amazing how I got to work with like world-class engineers through open source without never being in the same company. That said, open source also is an unfair advantage. Like if you think about it, like there's a lot of companies like playing with agents now and trying to do agentic platforms or frameworks out there, but a lot of them are sitting behind paywalls. And if you do that, not as many people can play with it. So I think the ability that we have to get people to use the open source version of or for a solution, it's incredible. So as a distribution channel, open source is great. And that's how we get into some of those bigger enterprises. But once in those enterprises, then the conversation needs to evolve. Like the kind of needs of an enterprise are very different from the needs from like a single engineer. There's kind of a last mile that needs to be done. It's way longer than last mile than 1 mile that needs to be done in order to support these enterprises.
It's well said.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm glad you flipped that question on its head, because I was going to ask you about open source second, but I think you've reframed the topic, which is going open source and then making the move into enterprise in that last mile. What kinds of things do you find on that last mile driving down that road?
Well, that's a lot. Honestly, like once that you go to enterprises, there's security, right? That's the first thing. People don't want to like run these things on a random computer. They don't want to even run it as a SaaS cloud. They want to run their own infrastructure. So from the ground up, you got to think your platform to be able to be self-hosted. So some customer is like a big Azure partner or a Gemini partner, and they have all these credits and these relationships. They need to be able to deploy those things in their hyperscaler. So that's one piece of that. Then two, despite of AI and the AI features, these people need to have a very granular, fine control of access. You need to be able to create specific roles, give access to specific things. You need to have a set of features that allow one single department to kind of like set everything up for everyone. So if like register your approved LLM provider, registry all your open keys, your open AI keys. Like you don't want to have those flying around in a big company. You never know where it's going to end.
No spreadsheets. You want to lock them down. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's an element of security or fine-grained control. And then of course, like what you see on the open source with CrewAI is we have a lot of content that help you plan, and we have the framework that'll help you build. But on the enterprise, we expand that quite a lot. Way more resources for planning, way more resources for building, a UI for you to build with no code. And then we go way past that. We start deploying so you can deploy them. We start to monitoring so that you can actually track these things in production. You can track the quality. You can set like alerts. And then you go into iterating where you can compare models. You can switch models or so much more. So as I said, there's a lot of that last mile in there. And a lot of that goes beyond AI features. A lot of that goes to have this expertise of working with enterprises that myself got like through building Clearbit and selling to these companies. And most of our team has been like working on this setting as well in the past. So this really helped us to understand like not only the buyer, but like what this infrastructure needs are, and the security needs are, and everything in between.
Can you bring that to life though? Like for people that are listening, right? Like there's these enterprises that are building, okay, cool. They're using agents. Like, but give us like, what is an actual use case, right? Like,
yes.
Like give us one. You don't have to name the company. You can
say meet Bob. I love this question. Yes.
All right. So there is a few. Let me say I'm gonna do three use cases real quick, and then we can dig into some like if you want to. So first one that impressed me was coding use case. So there's a lot of companies out there that sell consulting work, right? And as part of their consulting work, sometimes there's like software engineering work that is part of that. So for example, updating old versions of code into newer versions, updating integrations and all that. And once that you look into that, a lot of that updating from one version to newer versions, like a lot of that is repetitive work. There's an element of engineering that is like updating, making sure that it works, then testing, finding where it breaks and fixing it again. But that feels very much like something an agent could do. So actually, that's one of the use cases that we're seeing deployed out there by some of our early beta customers is this ability to have agents that actually can automatically update legacy data, actually legacy code bases into new versions and saving like hundreds of hours on that way every time that they run.
Well, let's just dig into that one really quick before we go to other use cases. But like, the natural question that someone would ask, right, is going to be like, okay, well, cool, but there's Microsoft Copilot, there's all these coding startups, right, that are out there. So why would I use agents to do that when I could use like one of those other solutions that comes in bundled into the Office suite or whatever?
Yeah, I would say we use Copilot ourselves. Actually, now we're using Cursor, so it's a little different.
Yeah.
But we use like AI Copilots in a sense ourselves, and we have a lot of fun with that. But this kind of like next level. Like the Copilot helps me code and makes me way faster. When I'm talking in autonomously, grabbing code, rewriting it, testing it, finding the errors, refixing it, shipping it again, find like up to the point that it works. And once it works, there's an engineer that does like a final pass, make sure that everything's good. But these are like fully autonomous, like unsupervision kind of use cases, different from like, hey, I forgot how to do a loop. Can you help me here? Do a loop for this or write this component real quick. I think especially this element of being able to not only write the code, but then set up an environment with specific version of a programming language, executing that, looking at the error and autonomously taking action on that is what in this coding use case specifically, I think made a lot of difference for them.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. That's not something you could do like with whatever's out there nowadays. So
yeah. Well, you had the other two use cases, so I'll let you go with those.
Yes. So another two use cases, let's talk legal. There's a legal one, very interesting, is with a big telecom company. So I don't know if you folks know about this, but whenever you get your bill, do you see like those weird line items that are like podcast, ebook, whatever that might be? Like I don't know why I'm paying for this. So there is specific legislation in one of the countries that this customer is that gives them, they don't pay taxes on that. So what they do is when they're giving the customer a deal, they try to structure in a way that they can put the most of the bill into those electronic products because they don't pay taxes on that. But there's a set of rules that they need to follow, specific percentages, the way that the thing needs to set up, the way that they compare with existing offers that they have made. They can't say like, hey, this ad hoc offer is going to have like $100 in podcast. No, they have some rules. And because of those rules, they need to pass every single deal through legal. And that is a huge pain. So now we actually have like built with them this use case that is very cool where you have agents receive that offer, agents review it, fill up an entire spreadsheet and sends to legal just for approval. Like, hey, this is it, recommend approval. This is the percentages, everything checks out. Legally, this is okay. You're good to go. And these agents actually look at the database, compare with previous offers, make sure that this is in line with everything. So it's a very interesting use case. And I didn't saw it coming.
What I think is really cool about that one too is not only is it replacing costs, right, of not having to go to legal or maybe not having to go to legal as often, right? But also you're actually generating, in this case, profits by helping the business, actually be able to not have to pay those taxes. So you have this almost, I won't call it revenue generation because not, but profit generation aspect to it. And then also a cost savings aspect to it, which is also further generating more profit. So I think it's like a really cool double bottom line sort of thing that's happening there. Before we get to the third use case, I of course have a question as this as well. Like,
Shoot.
Are you having to, if someone's using CrewAI for this use case, do they have to train a specific LLM on this legal type language and this tax language and stuff like that? Or how is the agent then understanding all of this and then executing upon it?
That's a great question. So no, you don't. There's a few companies that choose to. We're seeing that pattern on like health related companies or financially like companies that operate in finance just because of the way that they operate. Sometimes they already have like fine tuned models that they want to use, and that's one component of that we can talk about separately. But no, for most of use cases, you don't need to fine tune a model. You can provide a lot about like the specific rules into the agent's definition. And if not, we also offer a feature that we call agent training. The way that that works is kind of like onboarding your agents, right? So you already have created your agents, you already have told them what to do, but now it's not about exactly what to do, it's how to do it. Is a specific format, is a specific way, is specific like never forgetting to bring like references. So there is a feature that we call CrewAI training that allows you to train your agents by basically getting them to run a few times, and they're going to stop along the way and say like, hey, how am I doing? And you can say like, no, you're doing it wrong. Too many questions, looking too much data, just keep it short. And then the next one's going to say, all right, how am I doing now? And you can say, no, you forgot the references. Always bring the reference. And that then becomes intertwined with your agent in part of their memory. So they never forget about this. And now they can run over and over again. And we are seeing companies use that to enforce formats, to enforce very specific rules, or even to enforce a certain mood or behavior. So if you want an agent to write something in a funny way, or then you want to write in a more serious way, so you can have different training sets. And you can say, hey, run these agents using this training set that will make them funny, or run these agents using this training set that will make them like they follow a specific format, and you can kind of play with that.
Do the agents automatically know that, hey, I'm giving you this instruction that should be stored to, like, for example, you said always bring references. Well, the fact that it says always probably means that needs to be long-lived memory, because anytime I call that agent, I want to make sure that it's bringing those references, right? Like, is it automatically doing that? How does it know whether long or short memory?
Yeah. So during the training, everything that you're giving, every feedback is long term. So it's going to remember that forever. So doing that training specifically is focused on like, it's literally like you can think about onboarding. It's like, hey, I'm going to tell you how I want you to do your job, and I'm going to be very direct, and you're never going to forget about it. So it's literally that. During regular executions, though, what happens is during an execution, there's some information that is stored from one agent to another. Like all the agents get access to that single short-term like memory. Then we also have a few different layers of like long-term memory. So any entities that the agents become aware, for example, if they learn, oh, what is Google? Oh, Google is a big company that does this and that and all that. So they store that information. So they have like an understanding of entities. So they don't need to look that up over and over again if they ever need to. And then there's a long-term memory that is kind of like a self-reflection. They are constantly evaluating like, how am I doing? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? And what could I have done better? And they know that because in CrewAI, we have a very opinionated way on how you create these tasks. And we force you to do in the right way, even if you don't know what you're doing, by saying like, hey, you need to give the task definition, but you're also required to give what is the expected output. So by forcing you to do it, we're basically forcing you to, one, behind the scenes write better prompts for these agents, but also giving us an evaluating framework, because now you said what you expect, so we can compare whatever you got with what you expected to make sure that it was good. And if it's not that great, the agents can then use that as internal feedback for the long memory, just keep getting better and better.
I mean, that's
That's
so
far
cool.
out.
Yeah, that's wild. One thing I just want to talk about here is like CrewAI is, in the name itself, part of the reason why it's a crew of agents, right? And I think the paradigm before was maybe like a single agent going and doing a task, but now you can have this CrewAI. Like talk to us about just like, what does the multi-agent world look like? Why is multi-agent so challenging, right? Or is it not challenging? Maybe it's actually pretty simple, right? Like, I mean, just talk us through, what does the multi-agent like kind of world look like?
Yeah, I would say like, I think it's a very complex thing. I think there's a lot of companies now are kind of like thinking like, hey, maybe we should do this. Should we do this internally? Should we try to find someone to help you to do it? And I think the companies that are choosing to do it internally, we are actually seeing some of those. Hey, we tried to do it internally. We have something that is working, but takes too long, it's too hard. and then they come to us. So we are seeing some of that pattern happen already. And I think like where Crew specifically is positioning as a business is kind of like this sweet spot where you're not necessarily like buying versus building, you're buying to build faster, right? And that's kind of like some of the magic. So you still have a lot of the power because it's kind of like a platform. But I think this idea of like multi-agents, there's a few things that make the multi very important. One is because you're talking about many agents, they got to be specialized agents. So you can have, for example, in some of the use cases that we mentioned, you can have a specific legal agent, and you can have a specific like summarization agent and a specific agent to handle customer data. And the reason why that's important is not because you can give them specific instructions, because that's one layer, but also because you can have them run from specific LLMs. And this is crucial because it gives you a lever to control costs. So you can say like, hey, this is going to be a smaller model. It's going to be cheaper. It gives you the ability to control vendors. So you can say like, hey, I'm just going to use this vendor for this because we have credits on it or whatever it might be. And also give you ability to control security. Because you can say, hey, I have this fine-tuned model that runs local in my environment. This data is never getting out. I know where data locality is. I'm compliant with my legislation, and I can have this agent that handles customer data run out of that LLM. So there's a few components of having multi-agents that makes things better, and those are some of the layers. That said, there's also more benefits to that. The one thing that got me thinking early on Crew is like, well, if one agent hallucinates 5% of times or whatever that number might be, doesn't 5 agents hallucinates like 95% of the time? And would that be a problem? But what I came to realize by running these agents in production is like, instead, what happens is they fact check each other. So you get better results. So if one agent kind of like goes crazy and says like something that like don't even care, the next one say like, this is completely wrong. We're not doing anything related to this. So you know what? Let me steer it back. And depending on how you set up your crew, these agents can have the ability to ask questions to each other and delegate work. So what I have seen in some more complex automations is agents basically delegate it back and say like, hey, like you shouldn't do this. This is the data. Keep in mind we're trying to get to here. And then the agent takes off and redo some of the work. So what we're seeing is actually better results by having these agents working together, either like on a chain or even in parallel by having like a manager agent. There's a few different ways that you can set them up.
As you're talking, I'm mapping this closer and closer to deployment models in general. I mean, historically, big companies have gone to public service process outsourcers and things like implementers. And they've gotten lots of humans to go into those companies and implement the software. And as you're talking, I'm realizing that agents are able to do a lot of that. And then I remembered just now, you said people buy Crew to enable they can build it. So I was hoping we could touch on that within the context of deployment models and how they're changing.
That's a good point. And honestly, this is kind of like the main difference, right? Like when you're thinking about enterprise, like, all right, I'm going to take you for a ride. Bear with me for a second. It's very clear that the genie is not getting back into the bottle. Companies want to do AI agents. The benefit's clear. They want to like capture that. But in order for that future to happen, there's a few boxes that you need to check, especially on the enterprise level. And some of them are easy, other very complex. So you need to be enterprise ready. We talked about that. All right, you can check that box. Then the other thing is it needs to be universal. And we are touching into that now. That is like you need to support multi LLMs. You need to support multiple integrations. Like you can't be a beautiful garden, but completely walled because then you can go outside. Like that sucks.
Black box won't work.
Right. Exactly. And then you gotta have to enable like complex use cases. That's the other big important piece. But then Andrew, to what you're talking, I think this is the most important box of all is need to be fast and easy. And I'm going to tell you why. If it's required for a company to build an AI agent automation application, they need to deploy X amount of engineers, designer, product person, and take 6 months to build it. That screws up the economics. If you make it easy And that's the main thing about CrewAI. And anyone in the community is going to tell you that CrewAI is the easiest, the simplest, the fastest. And when you do that, what we are seeing is that you also screw the economics, but in the other way, where now it's so easy that companies can basically try things. They can try and throw different things at the wall. When then something sticks, they double down on that. And because this is such a new tech, this is the way to go. Like, you gotta be able to experiment and gotta be fast. You can have to deploy like 3, 5, 10 engineers into a project for like 3 months or 6 months to get something working. You gotta be able to like enable your entire company to try new things. And then the innovators within your company are going to come up with all these crazy cases. And then if you want to double down on them, then you get engineering involved with. But that time, you reduce the risk of investing time and effort on making sure that you're focusing on the right thing. So I think that's kind of like the main difference between deploying these kind of things and bringing them into these companies and these production environments.
I think that's a great point. It's historically what jumps out at me is you had RPA before this, robotic process automation, and then that turned into intelligent process automation. And I feel like it got into that prototyping phase and everybody started hooking into APIs, had the GUIs, big companies came out of it, but it was not nearly as fast as what's going on right now. And then it had a lot of trouble getting into production, I feel like, and it never quite delivered. Do you agree with that? Like, are you standing on RPA or are you looking at this as something completely different? Because I know it's a question you get asked probably a ton.
Yeah, I do. And I think you got a nail in the head. I think RPA, when RPA came out, like, was this, everyone was so amazed by like the endless possibilities, but then the results fell a little short. And what we're seeing now is actually, we're talking one of the biggest beverage companies in the entire world, and they're actually running CrewAI already. And one of their things, like, hey, we have a huge RPA installation, but it's brittle. And what they find is not necessarily want to replace it because they have some scar tissue. It was so hard to get it there. They're like, don't touch it. Let's just let it be. But they want to expand. They're like, all right, can I get my agents hooked up into that and then go from 15% automated processes to 95% automated processes? And this is actually one of the requests that we got. It like a customer like say to us like, hey, we have like 15% of our process automated. Want to get to 95. And this use case with this beverage company is something like that, where they have like this huge portal where everyone in their company, like thousands of employees, can put in different kinds of requests. And they have a CrewAI set of agents that pull up this data from their Azure environment, applies a bunch of rules depending on the request, feed that data back into their SharePoint and a few other things. And then there's an existing RPA installation that takes from that and goes into like update the database or do something that was already in place. But that's kind of like bridging that huge gap between the promises and where things fell a little short.
I was going to ask you what brittle meant, but that really explained it perfectly. It's just picking up where it left off, and it's all the complex parts of that workflow that a human would need to handle and then feedback. Got it.
One of the areas I want to dive into is actually kind of more the future of where we're going, right? And this is going to be more AI broadly, not just agents, but of course, like, you know, we'll loop in some agents as well. But like Eliot and I have some different questions in this area. I guess one question that I want you to start out with, just to kind of frame sort of the progress that's been happening, is there's been a lot of models that have been shipped. There's been, you know, so much education. There's been so many things. But like, what for you, in your opinion, has been the biggest leap for agentic adoption so far since you started CrewAI?
That's a great question. Honestly, the models are great. I remember early days, and we have been building Crew for like a year now. So yeah, like the models that we had available back then are nowhere near close like what we currently have right now. I think we had to work a lot with 3.5, GPT 3.5 back in the day, and now like a 4.0 mini, like the cost of that, how fast it's run, and even like Llama 3.2, like some of these new models, they're insane what they can do. So I would say the models and how fast they have been evolving is enabling a lot of agentic use cases that were not possible before. And if anything, that is just like branching out the kind of like number of use cases that we're seeing. And we're starting to see more and more kind of like very edge cases, like very futuristic kind of like use cases. And that has been very interesting to watch. So I think the models themselves have been like a very big difference. Between those models, there are a few that were like big jumps. I think the 4.0 was a big jump for us because not only about the quality, because the quality early on was kind of even inferior than GPT-4, but the costs. The costs were so drastically reduced that now like having agents like more complex and running like long text and long things like became like way more doable and reachable for a lot of the startups and companies out there. So that has been very interesting to see like an explosion of use cases on that way. And also some of the open source models. As I said, a few specific customers are kind of like, hey, we need to have our own fine-tuned model because we can have data out. And having models as good as kind of like Llama and a few others that they can actually fine-tune, or Mistral and all that, that unlocked a few use cases that we were not seeing before as well.
There was a big that what was it called, O1 Strawberry or something like that. It was the naming is kind of crazy. I don't understand it, but anyway, when that came out, right, it had this whole chain of reasoning sort of thing. And what you've described about agents so far is this reasoning ability and to kind of think through that. So I guess like what does that mean? Like, is that a boon for agents? Like is that a leap forward? Like, kind of contextualize what is going on with this whole chain of reasoning inference thing.
I think like there's and if everyone in the industry seems to agree there's like 5 different levels. People don't seem to agree on what the levels are a little bit, but there's some overlap. But there's definitely like a few different levels of like how autonomous your AI can get. And I think what we're seeing is if you look at very traditional, you're talking about RPA, if you can like go up the ladder a little bit, you're seeing more graph and node related automations, and you can have some AI in a node or two, and that kind of works, but that like still doesn't have like the agency and all that. Then you can see these new models like O1 and O1 Mini, and I think they're very good. We actually, the day that O1 launched, we cut a new version of CrewAI that supported using it. And we had to do some specific code changes to support it, because what we realized is early on, without those changes, those models were generating way more hallucination than models before. Because what happened before is the models because they had no like chain of thought, they would have to rely on the tools in order to get to an answer. They knew that they had tools at their disposal and they would use the tools. But this model, because it thinks of itself as so smart and had all this chain of thought, basically he would decline using the tools and just like try to get into an answer itself.
No way.
And that would create all kinds of hallucinations. Like, well, you're not researching, you're not grabbing the data that I need you to. You're just like pulling things out of the thin air. So there was some changes that it did in order to support it, and now it works fine. You can see it, and we definitely see improvement in quality, but it doesn't justify the price and the speed. So one of the features that we have on the enterprise offering is what we call CrewAI testing. And you can basically use this testing feature to compare as many models as you want. So I was running a comparison this week actually with 4.0, 4.0 Mini, O1 Mini, and O1. And the scores were like this. 4.0 was like a 6.3 quality score from 0 to 10. And would take, if I recall correctly, 10 seconds or something like that, and would use 3 million tokens. 4.0 Mini was a big bump from 4.0. It was a score of 8.4. And you say, well, but this is a smaller model. How the quality is better? And the thing is, despite of being a smaller model, when you look at the time, it took longer. It took like 4 seconds more. And the reason of that is because smaller models sometimes might struggle and they might go into that end, but because of the self-healing capability, they figure out and go back fast and track. But that iteration creates a better outcome. So that was super fast still, a score of 8.4 in 4 million tokens. Super cheap for a model that size. And when you compare with an O1 preview, that is like the biggest one, the score was 9.4, like almost a solid 10. Amazing. 74 seconds.
Oh,
jeez.
10 million tokens.
Oh my God.
So you're like, for like, it's likely if you're a 10% like improvement or like 15% improvement, like it's probably not worth it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy to think about this sort of stuff, but
the one thing that I will call out is like it's kind of like the how fast and cheap these things get over time, right? Like if you look at 3.5 1 year ago and you look at 4.0 now, like you see that trajectory, pricing's going down, speed going up. So something's going to happen like in the same way with these models. So these models should become more accessible and cheaper. And I think that will unlock more use cases because you definitely get better quality. It's just like the time and like the cost can be prohibitive for some people.
You've got the best view into this community. And I'm wondering what you're seeing as the current big push. Like what needs to get done in your purview that you can see being the big topics that everybody's going to be pushing either to prove, disprove, solve, debunk? What do you think it is?
Honestly, I think right now it's an interesting question because a lot of like what I think is missing, it's what we're trying to build at Crew. So I would say what is missing is Crew. That's what I would say. But maybe I have drank too much of my own Kool-Aid. But I think there's a few components, right? Like the things that we were talking before, like for enterprises to adopt this, the thing needs to be enterprise ready. That means security, that means support, that means SLA, that means integrations, that means being able to deploy on our own cloud. So all that needs to be that's kind of like that is the minimum that needs to be done for these things to even happen. So if you're not doing that, you won't get that level of adoption of the enterprise. Then you need to make sure that it's universal. You can integrate with as many LLMs as you want, as many software as you want. I'm talking ERPs, CRMs, everything in between. Then 3, you need to make sure that you support complex use cases. And then 4, you need to make sure that people can build this very fast and simple. So a lot of what we have done recently on the platform side is this idea of selling a factory. So when this big company, especially on the bigger side of like the bigger companies, they come to us, we're talking about not only selling them this product, but selling them the enablement of the entire company, all the departments to build and run these agents. So in order for us to do that, we had to build a very simple no-code UI for people to build these agents. And then also a way for them to run these agents and to inspect these agents so that it's very reasonable for people to expand. So I think without checking those boxes, those 4 boxes that I mentioned, and there's a bunch that go into them, I think these things are not going to happen. And the other thing would say is, I think we need to see, like, we're going to probably start seeing more this year, broadcast results at scale. So you can already see that, right? Like if you look at some of like the 8Ks, 10Ks that are getting out there from some of those public companies, you can already see like companies like Almart and others start to kind of like mentioning in there because they have to, but they don't want to like everyone to know, like, oh, we're saving X millions of dollars because we're using AI on this now, on AI on that. So I think like there's people kind of like playing like a little shush, like let's not let people know.
It's not the first time I've heard that either. I've heard that from very high ups at very big consulting firms that no one wants to talk about how much money they're saving. It's fascinating.
Yes. So it's a little weird because like I think like the 2025 is going to be like where kind of like some people are going to have no other option other break the seal. So we're going to see more of those results being broadcasted.
One thing that I'm really curious about is like, as we get more into this multimodal world, like, is that really cool for agents? Like, what are we going to be able to pass through, a video of, to that onboarding thing that you were talking about? What if somebody actually created an onboarding video for their employees and they're like, you know what, agent, I just want you to go and learn this. And then like, let's start iterating. Like, kind of talk us through what does multimodal deliver?
Yes, I think multimodal basically gives these models eyes and ears, so that unlocks more use cases. And it's funny because on Crew we are not natively multimodal yet, and that has been like something that people ask us about. And honestly, I feel like there's so much room for us to explore up to this point with text alone that like we're no short of use cases and customers and work. But I can definitely see how multi-model can like expand that even further. And we are seeing some customers, again, the ones that are more working on the cutting edge, that they're using Crew for that. There's ways that you can do it, even like we're not using a model behind the scenes. But I think one of the craziest use cases that I have seen, and you're going to love this, Shomik, because I know that you love football as well, is a big consultancy, Fortune 500 company. And they are working with another Fortune 500 company on the media business. And this company has fine-tuned vision models that are able to track a ball on the screen. So given a live footage of the game, they can track where the ball is and what it's going. And they're trying to use CrewAI to act as video directors and audio directors, using those models to cut, to add audio, music, captions, and everything, and pushing content on social media live. So I have live stream going and cuts being made by these agents as they go. So crazy use case. And I think it's probably one of the most advanced potential customers that we're talking with so far. But it's kind of like where I think like some of the use cases that is going to unlock by having agents being able to do that.
That's incredible. That's the coolest use case I've heard. So that leads to a more interesting question. Shoma, if we have time for what, yeah. Do you think that most people are going to even know they're interacting? If you just kind of look into your crystal ball with all that you know, do you even think that for the foreseeable future we're going to know we're interacting with these agents, or are they going to be more like TCP over IP?
That's I think we're gonna intrinsically know, but we're gonna be okay with that. I love the fact that people compare like AI agents and AI in general with the internet, because I think there's a lot of like similarities between the two. There's a few crucial differences, but I think that the main similarity for me is that I think AI will be a platform and AI agents will be a platform. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the internet, like we are having a podcast over the internet. We're building a business over the internet. I order my food over the internet. I meet people over the internet. So the internet became this platform where things happen. And I think AI is going to be that. And it's already is. And you don't care as much. So Netflix, you have your shows recommendations being made by AI. You're going to get your food recommendations made by AI. You're going to have your people recommendations came through AI. So I think it's going to be similar in the way where things are going to run on AI, and we're just going to be okay with that. That's going to be the platform where this things happens, and through which it happens. I think the main difference between this comparison, just to call it out, is with the internet. If you go back to like the dot-com boom, was a lot about, at least on the business side, was a lot of like, hey, you need to be online because that's where the future is going to be. But if you had a website on day zero, that won't have any impact on you because no one is there. But with AI, it's different. What we're seeing is kind of like you implement AI in one quarter, next quarter you have results, and you are adding them and you're seeing the impact on the bottom line. So I think that's the main difference, and I'm very curious to see how this is going to work given this crucial difference between the two platforms. So I don't know. Gonna have to watch out.
That's awesome. Well,
love it.
I want to ask like the final question, which is, and I was going to ask it actually, ironically, talking about like what are you most excited about for the world of agents in the next year? But actually, you know what? Given how quickly things are moving, I'm just going to say like, what are you most excited about in the next 3 to 6 months? Like what is getting you fired up in that short of a time frame about just like the pace of things that are happening?
I love that. I think the thing that I'm most excited about is I want to see entire companies being able to build and deploy agents. I think like we're seeing that in companies already, but I think it's on the early days of spreading within companies. So it's great to see many companies interested, but I'd love to see companies getting completely dominated by it in a good way, where like you start to see all these people using it and exploring and build these use cases. So I'm very excited to see like people putting like just non-technical people kind of having that aha moment similar to what they have with LLMs. And then you move from having like these LLMs that are being used into like the edges of business to like things they're using like on the entirety, on the core of those businesses. I think that's one thing that I'm very curious about. And on the technical side, honestly, I want to see some new models. I want to see what people are going to come up with. There's a lot of new infrastructures. There's new chips, NVIDIA with new GPUs that increasing the speed of training. So honestly, I'm very curious to see what new models are going to come from all that.
Well, I think with that, we at boldstart cannot be more excited to partner with you and also just see the use cases. I mean, a lot of these are things that neither of us had heard before too, and so it's really exciting to do it. The video use case, for example, I'm like, for this podcast alone, I would love to have that happen and just have it be able to post on social media. So I think it's a pretty exciting world for agents ahead and for AI broadly. And so we really want to thank you for coming on, for all the wonderful news that's happening for the business, and can't wait to do this again in a year where I think I imagine all the stuff we just talked about will have just dramatically changed and come to fruition.
I love that. Thank you so much for having me again, Showmik, Eliot. I really appreciate it. And yeah, very excited for what the future looks like.
Go CrewAI.
Yes.